Hello, my name is Evan Lohman, and I'm here to give you a sermon. The title of my sermon is called How to Get God's Presence, and I thought up of 3 main points that could help you or could help one of your friends. Maybe you're in church and you just can't experience, like some people, they need a worship team or prayer warrior just to get God's presence closest to them, but you're not always going to have the luxury of, Pastor Steve or another prayer warrior right next to you the whole time. You're not always going to have a band behind you to pull in the presence of God with the song. Sometimes out in public or even in your own room by yourself, you're just going to need to pull down the presence of God right where you're standing and right at that moment. And you can't just always be dependent on somebody else or be dependent on music just to get you there. And so my 3 points of getting to God's presence is know who you're praying to, lose all of self-consciousness, and remove all fear. So I'm going to start my first point now. So the first point to my sermon of how to get God's presence is know who you are praying to. Obviously the goal obviously I'm praying to God, but it's more than that. And with each one of my points, I'll be giving an example like it is right here on earth. Because think of the Holy Spirit and think of God's presence as someone who is really sensitive and someone who can be very easily offended. Because the Holy Spirit is easily offended. If you're going after him and praying that he comes near you, and he does, and he ends up coming to you, then that's great. But the second your mind wanders off on something else, he's going to get offended. He's not going to want to hang around any longer. He's like, all right, well, I know where their heart is, and it's not on me right now, so what's the point of me hanging out here? So that's one part of knowing who you're praying to, but let's just say here on earth, with that like sensitive information, let's just say here, what's going to get your attention more? Let's say you're not going to go to a party of someone if you don't know them. So the Holy Spirit isn't going to come to you one day if he doesn't even know who you are. Like if you just start praying one day, obviously he's going to hear it. But if you've been living 2 weeks in the world, if you've been doing all those kind of things that we say, man, no Christian, anyone that calls himself a Christian should never involve themselves in this activity. Well, if you've been doing that for 2 weeks and then you try to pull down the presence of God, the Holy Spirit's going to say, I don't know who you are. I don't know what your name is. I don't even know the first thing about you. So on earth, if I'm invited to a party and it's some guy on Facebook I've never even met before, I'm not gonna go to that party. I don't know who they are. And on the same note, I'm not gonna invite people I don't know. If I don't know the Holy Spirit, then what business do I have of inviting him here? Because I'm gonna try to prepare my heart first before I invite him closer to me. So like I said earlier, you can't live your whole week in sin and expect to get something from God and expect his presence to join you and meet you on Sunday. If you want to count on God's presence meeting you, then he has to count on you meeting him. And that's the end of my first point of know who you're praying to. You're praying to a very sensitive Holy Spirit who's aware of what you've been doing all week and of who you are and what you are if you pray to him too. Now, I'm moving on to my second point of how to get God's presence closer to where you are. And that second point is lose all self-consciousness. If you don't know what self-consciousness is, that is that thing in the back of your head that's saying, that voice that's saying, well, what's the person behind me think of my worship right now? Or it doesn't even have to be in a church setting. If you're walking down the street, like if someone looks at you, be like, oh, are they trying to make fun of me or something like that? Just that thing that just wonders what other people are thinking about you. And that's going to be a big hindrance in trying to get God's presence. Because if you're just focused on other people and focused about yourself, then what business does he have there? It's like, obviously, you're not focused on me, so I don't want to mess around with you right now. So let's take it into like a worldly, not worldly, but something physical that we can understand. For one, if you're self-conscious, you're not going to be outgoing. You're not going to be trying to get people's attention. And let's say that you have 2 friends, and one of them, they're in different locations. They both want you to hang out. And you got one that texts you like once every 3.5 hours, and then another guy that's calling you every 15 minutes to check to see if it's okay, if you can come. Who's going to get your attention more? The guy that like barely cares, or the guy that's trying to like, hey, like come on, let's go do this. Or like, let's say there's an advertisement for pencils or something like that, and it's the same pencil, it's the same price, but one guy has this beautifully colored advertisement, and this other guy could care less with whether or not it's advertised or not. Who are you going to buy from? I mean, probably the guy with the cool advertisement, because he's just trying to get your attention. And in church, I think some people just aren't trying to get God's attention in their worship. They're not putting energy towards it, but you can see them putting energy into other things, putting energy into sports, or putting energy in, just other things, and hanging out with friends, but they don't care what they look like around their friends. But as soon as they come to church, then all of a sudden they're worried about what's going on. And that's one thing that's going to hinder it. So if you put aside your self-consciousness, you put aside what other people are thinking about, and you said, God, you're the only opinion that matters right now, and that's how you're going to get God's presence closer to you. I'm moving on to my third point into getting the presence of God closer to you, and that's removing all fear. Once you're in church, or once you're needing the presence of God to be wherever it is that you happen to be. Let's just say that you're at a restaurant, for instance, and you overhear like a guy at the table next to you says, man, my marriage is really, really shaky, really on the rocks. I don't know what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks. Let's say your fear rises up and it gets in the way. And you're like, oh, well, I know, I guess I'm too scared to go over there and tell him about my church, or I guess I'm too scared to go over there and help pray for his marriage or something like that. And that's one instance where your fear is going to get in the way of the kingdom of God, in one way that the presence of God is going to try to avoid you. Like, well, if you're too scared to use me around other people, then I'm going to be scared to mention your name around God. I mean, you think about it like that, you're like, well, whoa, that'll get you to put aside away all your fear. And even when we're in church, if Pastor James or your youth pastor, wherever church you go to, says, I want you to speak an encouraging word over the youth group, and you say, well, I can't speak, I'm not a public speaker like that, and you're just scared and get tensed up, and then you're not being a good representation of the Holy Spirit, and you're not doing what the Holy Spirit wants you to do at that time, because the chances are the Holy Spirit called you out to your youth pastor to say something like that. So when we put aside all fears and God moves through us, and when God moves through us, His whole presence is not just around us, but it's even flowing through us and flowing through our bodies and using us as a vessel, and that's what we want to do. So that sermon is basically all I have for you guys today here on the Kids for the One God page. But let's just go over it real quick. How to get God's presence in your life. Well, the first thing you do is know who you're praying to. Know what God you're serving. Know that He's a sensitive Holy Spirit and that He wants to be closer to you, but you have to be closer to Him as well. And the second, lose all self-consciousness. It doesn't matter what the person behind you thinks. The only opinion in the room that matters is God Himself. And the third point being, remove all fear. If you're fearful, then the presence of God isn't going to move through your body. And that's the last thing we want when we need Him in a certain situation in public, because that's when we really want Him to flow through us. Thanks for liking the Kids for One God page, and I hope to see you guys soon. Have a nice day.